On Washington Unplugged, former White House Press Secretary Dana Perino, analysis of Obama's first 100 days and Rwanda genocide 15 years later.
Good day, I'm Chip Reed, and this is Washington Unplugged. I'm sitting in for my esteemed colleague, Bob Schieffer. The venom has been flying this week over whether to investigate the Bush administration's use of harsh interrogation techniques, and we have the perfect guest to talk about that, Dana Perino, who was press secretary in the Bush White House. Dana, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What has been your visceral reaction to this when the president released the memos last week and seemed to suggest that he was opening the door to an investigation? Is this something that President Bush's closest friends and supporters are frustrated or even angry about?
Well, I actually think that what you should look at is the former CIA directors who all said that they were against the move. So last week I was asked about what I thought about the tough decision Barack Obama had made to release the memos. I don't think that was the tough decision. I think that what would have been a tough decision is to do one of two things. Either release them and call for an investigation, or not release them and tell everybody to back off. Instead, what he did was try to split the difference, and so he's made a mess of this whole thing. I think that the Obama administration is completely wrapped around the axle, and my concern is it's not just a communications problem now. I trust the CIA, and I trust General Mike Hayden when they say that the intelligence community will be less likely to do what they need to do in order to protect the country if they think they're going to be prosecuted later.
What do you think is the real motivation here of some of the Democrats on Capitol Hill who are really pushing hard for an investigation? Are they out to get the president and the former president and former vice president?
Well, it's hard for me to think like the Democrats because it's just not really something I've ever been really able to channel. But I do think it's curious that some of the leadership in the Democrats are calling for this. But I think that's one of the reasons you see some people calling for it and some people not, because the members of Congress were briefed. They were briefed about the program. They told the administration to continue because we knew that we needed to get this valuable intelligence. It's very different talking about this today in April 2009 when we've been safe for 8 years. None of us can know what it was like back in those days, and that includes Democratic members of Congress who were briefed on the program and were encouraging of the administration to move forward. So it will be very curious to me if they decide to go forward with the commission, whether they call themselves to the witness stand.
Now, Nancy Pelosi says she was briefed on the fact that there was legal justification for using waterboarding, but she says she was never told that waterboarding was actually used.
Okay, I don't understand how she splits the difference there, but if they want to have a commission and they're going to move forward with this, then I think you got to call her to the witness stand and find out what she knew and when she knew it.
Would you be opposed to having a 9/11 style commission to investigate this?
I do not think we need to investigate this. I think we've kept the country safe. Dennis Blair, the current administration's DNI, also said that this information helped us prevent terrorist attacks. He doesn't know that he said that he didn't know if back then he would have approved it, but what he does know is that it gave us an intelligence stream. It's very curious to me that they took that statement that he said to employees out of the press statement that they gave. And I was just thinking, if the Bush administration had done that, if we had edited somebody's statement to employees and edited that out when we sent it out to the press, we probably would have been fending off calls for a special prosecutor. So there's a lot of double standards going on here. I think we need to realize that we are dealing with a very tough enemy that is very patient, one that wants to attack us again, that we went after these terrorists. We've already said that those techniques aren't being used anymore. So what more is there to investigate unless they're on a political witch hunt? And I'll tell you this, politically, it is not smart for the Democrats to do this. But more importantly,
why is that?
Well, because the American people, I believe, are not going to want a political witch hunt, and they also understand that we have to protect the country from a very brutal enemy. Look, none of us want to talk about interrogation techniques. They're unpleasant for a reason, because you're trying to get intelligence.
Do you believe waterboarding is torture?
I have never answered that question because I don't know what I would have done in that situation if I had to protect thousands of lives.
Well, you're leaving open the possibility that it is, and it may be a violation of law. Shouldn't it be investigated to see if there were violations of law?
Look, I think all of these things are very unpleasant. If I said to you one of the techniques we would use is to try to rip people's fingernails out with pliers, we would probably consider that to be torture as well. I just think that we have to take a step back and realize that this program was effective, safe, and legal. And in addition to that, I trust somebody like General Mike Hayden more than anybody else when he says that they were absolutely critical to protecting the country, and that he thinks that releasing the memos hurts the country.
Do you suspect that President Obama himself would like to have an investigation here and would like to target the former administration and even the president himself?
I think people don't know because he's flip-flopped on this issue several times, and maybe flip-flopped not so in a clear-cut way, but in a way that leaves everybody very confused. And I'll tell you one thing you don't want as a president. You don't want your intelligence community confused or worried that you're not going to stick up for them when push comes to shove. And we need the intelligence community to trust the President of the United States in order to protect all of our safety.
Keeping the focus on the president but shifting topics, 100 days, how do you think he's done? Would you give him a grade?
Oh, I don't know if grades are the right way. I used a baseball metaphor earlier today where I said that I think that they've had some hits, they've had some misses, they've had a few foul balls, and they've hit a couple of home runs. So it's been a mixed bag. 100 days is not really enough to tell you if something is a success or a failure, but it is a legitimate benchmark to look at what kind of tone they are setting, and I think that unfortunately what's happened in the last 10 days is really going to affect them going forward. I don't think that people will even remember some of the things that happened back in January.
Now, his poll number is about where President Bush's were at this time, but the right track, wrong track shows it's a dramatic improvement over the Bush administration. Do you think that's because he's doing things right that President Bush did not?
Well, I think, look, I'm not a pollster, I don't exactly know, but I think if you look back to last fall, our poll numbers were way down. Republicans had been in power for 8 years. That was one thing to expect, that our numbers would be down, but also we were dealing with a major economic crisis. I think people are starting to feel that the economy might have some light at the end of the tunnel here, but I think they're more concerned about the policies because if you look at those numbers, Chip, Barack Obama personally remains very popular, but his policies are not as popular. And so actually, the next 100 days are probably even more important than the first 100 days when it comes to will he be able to get Congress to move forward on these major reforms that he's asking.
And Dana, I've got to ask you this before you go. You had one of the hardest jobs in Washington, daily defending a president who was under siege, and now you actually have a life. What's it like to make that transition?
Oh, it's wonderful. Although, I did defend the president every day, and I did it with pleasure, but I also would defend the press to the president and to his staff. I don't have to do any of that anymore. I'm getting a lot more sleep, and I'm able to be with my husband. And you know what? I'm getting to just tell you what I think, and that's been a really a pleasure for me, and I really thank you for having me on.
All right. Thank you, Dana, for being with us.
Okay.
All right. And this is Washington Unplugged on CBSNews.com. Welcome back to Washington Unplugged. I'm joined by two people who've watched President Obama's every move for well over the last 100 days. Kelly Goff, political analyst and blogger, and Washington Post White House reporter Scott Wilson. So, Kelly Goff, since you're here, let's start with you. How's he doing?
Well, according to the latest poll numbers, pretty well. I mean, I don't think he could have asked for a better 100 days anniversary gift than these latest numbers from both the Associated Press and Pew, which really have him sitting pretty, quite frankly.
Scott Wilson, do you agree with that? And do you think the polls are reflecting what's really happening?
Yeah, I do. I mean, regardless of how he's doing, he's certainly doing a lot. And I think that in large part, that's sending a message to the country that he's serious about addressing some of these big problems. He's taking on a lot at the same time. And I think the polls reflect that they feel like the country is, more and more Americans are feeling like the country is heading in the right direction. I think 3 times more than last month, according to some recent AP polls.
Yeah, his actual poll number is somewhere in the vicinity of George Bush's at this time, but it's really that right track, wrong track number that makes the big difference.
Well, for the first time in 5 years, there are more Americans saying that the country's headed in the right direction than in the wrong direction. But I also think that one of the most significant numbers that came out of that Pew poll that was released yesterday is the finding that his approval for foreign policy is actually even higher than his approval for domestic issues, which I don't think anyone really saw coming.
Why do you think that is?
I think that it speaks to how well those trips abroad went. I mean, I think that the irony is that, there was this whole potential for controversy with him shaking Chavez's hand, and definitely conservatives were trying to make some hay of that, but not gaining any traction. In fact, there was even another poll released this week about Cuban Americans, 2/3 approving of his shift in policy.
But doesn't that perhaps show some of the weakness in these numbers? Because yes, he's getting these good numbers and lots of plaudits for his overseas trips. And Scott, let me go back to you. But he didn't really accomplish that much. I mean, remember, he didn't get agreement on stimulus spending. He didn't get really quantifiable gains on these foreign trips. What he got was great photo ops and great image. Am I going too far with that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's as simple as Americans like to see their president celebrated overseas. Ronald Reagan had this effect. And so to some degree, I think the polls don't capture just the simple sentiment that Americans like their president to be liked.
Well, what's the saying that they say perception is reality in politics?
Yeah, right.
And the perception, they had a poll showing 67% of Americans believe that our leader is now respected in the world. Only 30% felt that way 2 years ago about George W. Bush. It's significant.
Let me ask you both to grade, if we could. Put your teacher hats on for a second here. Let's go to the economy first, since clearly that is the big issue. Can you give him an overall grade on the economy? And I know, in a sense, it's got to be incomplete, but aside from that, what would you give him?
You did take my first answer, incomplete. I'm going to go ahead and give him a B+, only because, again, 2/3 of Americans are still siding with him and have greater confidence in him than I think any of us expected at this juncture.
What about you, Scott?
Yeah, I think that's about right. I mean, I think that the accomplishing the stimulus bill, the largest domestic spending, act in history, less than a month into his administration, gave people a lot of confidence. It is putting money into the system, but yeah, it remains to be seen just how much effect this is going to have.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, pretty much everything he's done is a work in progress right now. I know people are giving him good grades and the polls are up, but playing devil's advocate for a moment, which of course is my job, but we don't know if the stimulus is going to work. We don't know if the bank workout plan is going to work, or the consumer lending plan, or any of the other plans. So how can we give him these good grades? I mean, people feel good. They feel like he's saying the right things, but we really don't know. This could, in the end, not have much effect on the economy and put a gigantic debt on future generations, couldn't it?
Well, Chip, I'm sure what I'm about to say is going to sound a little ironic coming from me, since right in this very moment I'm playing talking head, but I think it's really important for those of us who are sort of in the Washington Beltway bubble to distinguish between the perceptions of people who aren't talking about this every day, writing about this every day, but who are living these things. I think for a lot of Americans, the perception of having a president that makes them feel optimistic, the Ronald Reagan model, is important. So we can't discount that in terms of factoring that into the grade.
Yes, Scott?
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I do think that they're, on the wonky side of things, how much has the money that they've pumped in, stopped a deepening slide?
Right.
And when you hear, when there is a flurry of activity, the upside is people do feel that things are being done. So much of this is perception, whether it's on the stock market or just in someone's wallet. I am going to spend a little money. I will hire someone. I do feel like things are getting better. So, I do think whether the policy actually translates, there is a perception that things are going well. But I also will say that the more things you do, and I've heard this from some administration officials, they love the fact they're doing a lot at the same time. Bill Clinton was sort of famous for trying one big thing at a time. That's all he thought the system could really take. There's also a greater risk of a lot of these things colliding in some of these committees or overseas. You have a lot of balls in the air. Will the energy policy actually fit with the tax policy at the end? Will he be able to line up those kinds of things in Congress? And when you have a lot going on, that becomes trickier.
Okay, I have time for one really quick question, and it's something we were discussing before, that you're getting inundated by questions from people asking if he's going to make tangible differences in the lives of African Americans. This is a man who didn't run as an African American president.
Right. Well, it's really interesting. Like I said, when I've been doing panel discussions, I did one at Harvard Business School for the Black Students Association, and I'm doing another town hall tonight at New York Presbyterian Church. But one of the questions that does keep coming up is sort of, when are we going to see some tangible results on some of the harrowing statistics in the Black community, whether it's the AIDS rate, whether it's the prison
Are people
system.
disappointed, frustrated?
I think that, I think people have to give it time and have to be a little bit more realistic. I think that, keep in mind, a lot of the voters who voted for Obama were first-time voters. I think for some of them, they're not really used to the realities of how Washington works. So I think that he needs that for some of those people, time is sort of the essence for them.
Okay, well, thank you. Kelly Goff, thank you very much. And Scott Wilson, thank you very much. You are watching Washington Unplugged on CBSNews.com. Welcome back to Washington Unplugged. Our producer, Aaron Lyle, recently traveled to Rwanda, where 15 years ago, brutal genocide ripped the African nation apart. To her surprise, she found a peaceful country of healing people. Take a look.
15 years later, Rwanda continues to bury its innocent. The funeral for this mother of 8 took place last week, a full decade and a half after she was murdered in a genocide that ripped this country apart and erased up to 20% of its population. Her remains join the 283,000 already buried in mass graves here at the Kigali Memorial Center. Cathartic steps for a country working hard to move beyond its horrific history. When the roadblocks first appeared in April 1994, they had one simple purpose: to help Hutus identify and eradicate the Tutsi minority, work made easier by the fact that every Rwandan carried an ID card that identified his or her tribe. Within hours, the killings spread to homes, offices, and churches. Within 100 days, an estimated 1 million Rwandans were dead. Honoré Gatera was only 13 at the time. What was your experience with the genocide?
Well, my experience is a testimony that can take 2, 3, 4 hours. Yeah, but it's a very sad experience considering what I have seen with my own eyes. I think yourself have never seen someone macheting another one. You have never seen a mountain of dead bodies, but I have seen all of those with my eyes.
In the 15 years since, the country has taken real steps to heal. They have a democratic government, and perpetrators of the genocide continue to be tried and punished. Those ID cards have been changed too. No longer are people identified as Hutu or Tutsi, they're all Rwandan.
We are now secured, we are no longer divided, we feel to be one people, Rwandans. That's how the situation is.
And while life has returned to normal in villages like this one across the country, there are reminders on most doorways of the genocide that we'll never forget. Those signs instructing people to remember the genocide and live in peace now dot the same roadsides where murderers once manned roadblocks. People are beginning to move on, says this villager, and the future looks good. That future includes a burgeoning tourism industry, thanks in part to the country's 300 resident mountain gorillas. At this $600 a night lodge overlooking Rwanda's spectacular volcanoes, business has recently doubled, thanks to the foreign tourists who pay top dollar to track those rare gorillas.
The future is so promising. I appeal to everyone that you shouldn't have fear. Please come to Rwanda.
It's a pitch to put the past behind them that's echoed across the country.
These things has happened here in Rwanda is very bad. It's never again, I think. Never again happened here in Rwanda.
The issue of genocide has ended, and as they say, never again.
Many people do not feel like it's possible in such country people to get reconciled or people to move on living with what they have seen in 1994. But when you come to Rwanda, you learn more about it.
They continue to heal, forgiving without forgetting, and hoping that at the end of the day, remembering the horror will prevent them from repeating it. Aaron Lyle, CBS News, Kigali, Rwanda.
And thank you for watching Washington Unplugged on CBSNews.com. We'll see you right here next week.